Next, we're going to talk about school diversity. Our objectives in this part of the presentation are number 1, to understand MCPS diversity today and why it's so important to schools in the county. And 2, to understand the range of socioeconomic and demographic dissimilarity across and within clusters. Dissimilarity means that compared to the demographics of a particular neighborhood around a school or of an entire cluster, how well do those schools or those clusters represent the demographics of their surrounding area? When we talk about diversity, we include different measures of demographic diversity as well as socioeconomic diversity. We're talking about student diversity today and in the context of MCPS school policy because, as many studies have shown, diversity is an incredibly important tool for, number 1, increasing critical thinking and creativity, number 2, reducing racial bias, number 3, preparing for success in a global economy, and number 4, improving test scores. Montgomery County Public School students have the incredible advantage of living in a county that is diverse and reflective of the diversity of cultures, racial backgrounds, and nationalities, as well as languages spoken in this country. However, students who do not attend diverse schools will miss out on that opportunity. If you're curious about learning more about the benefits of diverse schools and classrooms, please take some time to look at the reference documents that we've provided on the website. This is not an exhaustive list of resources, but it is a good start. If you're interested in learning more, take a look at some of the additional reference pages that we've linked on our website. Although it's just one of many indicators of diversity, as an example for this exercise, we'll be looking specifically at socioeconomic diversity. Our measure for socioeconomic diversity is EverFarms, based on the numerous academic studies that have used EverFarms as a good indicator of economic diversity. EverFarms means the number of students or the percentage of students who have ever been eligible for free and reduced meals in Montgomery County Public Schools. When we look at the dissimilarity index of Montgomery County Public Schools, we're looking at the average percentage of EverFarms students in a cluster and comparing it to the average percentage of EverFarms students in an individual school. This allows us to compare the segregation or isolation of EverFarms students within particular schools, even when they live in a diverse school cluster. For our example today, which once again doesn't represent a specific focus of our study, but rather a good demonstrative model for how we can look at clusters across the county, we're going to be talking about the Gaithersburg cluster. In Gaithersburg, we know that the cluster has an average of 39% EverFarms students. So 39% of students in the Gaithersburg cluster have ever been eligible for free and reduced meals. But looking at the map in its entirety and each school in Gaithersburg, we know that there's quite a wide variation between EverFarms percentages at elementary schools in Gaithersburg. We have a range from an elementary school with an EverFarms percentage of 20%, which is below the average, up to schools with up to 91% EverFarms students, which is quite distant from the cluster average. When we take a close look at the map, we can also see through the gradient of colors and the adjacencies that this distribution of EverFarms students is stratified across the geography of the cluster. However, we also have schools with very low percentages of EverFarms students directly adjacent to schools with very high percentages of EverFarms students. When we zoom out to look at the entire county at the elementary school level, we also see a vast disparity in the isolation or diversity of EverFarm students across schools in Montgomery County Public Schools. The district-wide average of EverFarm students is 44%, meaning 44% of students who attend schools in Montgomery County have ever been eligible for free and reduced meals. However, the disparity between the lowest and highest average in Montgomery County elementary schools is quite significant. We have one school in Montgomery County with as low as 1% of EverFarm students, compared to another school in Montgomery County with as high as 94% EverFarm students concentrated in one school. When we look at the middle school level, we see a similar story. With a countywide average of 47% of EverFarm students, we also see a disparity that ranges between schools with only 3% EverFarm students and schools with up to 87% concentration of EverFarm students. At the high school level, we see some schools with as low as 4% EverFarm students and other schools with as high as 82% EverFarm students, with a district-wide average of 46%. As we look at each of these county-wide maps, it's also important to compare the adjacencies of the ratio of colors. With the lighter lilac representing schools with very low EverFarms percentages, and the darker maroon representing schools with very high EverFarms percentages. And we see in every case schools with very low EverFarms percentages located directly next to schools with very high EverFarms percentages. That means schools in the same neighborhood or in adjacent neighborhoods are concentrating low-income students in one place. So when we talk about all levels of schooling and socioeconomic diversity, what we understand is there are many schools located adjacent to each other that have vastly different percentages of EverFarm students. We also know from the research referenced on the list of reference documents on the website that concentrating low-income students in schools, even when additional resources are provided, has not been a successful model in the history of U.S. public schools. We have also found that across the United States, and in particular in Montgomery County, the most successful way to increase test scores and academic performance at schools has been through integration of low-income and upper-income students, as well as integration of students attending lower performing schools and students attending higher performing schools. This has proven to be not only an academically effective policy, but also a cost-effective policy, with studies showing that integrating students is far less costly than adding resources to lower performing schools without integration. Now that we've had a chance to talk about school diversity, we'd like to hear more from you. What feedback do you have for us about student diversity as a part of this boundary analysis? What else should we include in the analysis on student diversity? This may include other factors or metrics for diversity that you think are important to consider.